This is Capital Secrets, and what you're about to hear sounds impossible at first. Every country on Earth is in debt. America owes trillions. Europe owes trillions. Japan owes trillions. Even wealthy nations drowning in oil and exports continue borrowing enormous amounts of money every single year. But here's the strange part. If every nation owes money, who exactly is owed? Because debt is supposed to work like a simple promise. One person borrows, another person lends. But when entire civilizations are borrowing endlessly from each other, the system starts becoming something else entirely. Something larger, something stranger, and maybe something far more dangerous than most people realize. Most people think debt is simply a burden, a number on a screen, a bill waiting to be paid. But sovereign debt is different. National debt is not just an economic tool, it is the architecture of the modern world. Wars depend on it, governments depend on it, banks depend on it, entire financial systems depend on it. And the deeper you follow the chain of creditors, the more unsettling the answer becomes. Because eventually, you realize the world is not really borrowing from someone else. It is borrowing from itself. And somehow, the entire system keeps functioning anyway. To understand how humanity built a financial system this strange, we need to go back centuries. Long before digital banking, before stock markets dominated economies, before modern capitalism even existed, the origins of national debt were born in war. In 1694, England was fighting France and running dangerously low on money. The crown needed resources fast, weapons, ships, soldiers, but there wasn't enough gold left to finance the conflict directly. So the government turned to wealthy merchants and financiers, and in exchange for lending money to the state, those lenders received something revolutionary: a government-backed promise. The crown guaranteed future interest payments funded through taxes collected from the population. That single idea changed history forever, because now governments no longer needed existing wealth to spend money. They only needed confidence. Confidence that future taxes would continue flowing. Confidence that lenders would continue believing. And to manage this entire system, the Bank of England was created. That moment quietly transformed global power. Empires once conquered territory to seize gold. Now they issued debt to finance expansion instead. The battlefield became financial, and government bonds became one of the most powerful inventions in human history. Over time, the system spread everywhere. France copied it, the Netherlands refined it. The United States adopted it after independence to finance expansion across the continent. And, slowly, national debt stopped being viewed as weakness. Instead, it became a sign of power. Because the ability to borrow meant investors trusted governments enough to keep lending. And the more trust a nation had, the more money it could create. Fast forward to today, and debt has become the foundation of the global economy itself. The United States owes more than $38 trillion. Japan carries debt larger than its entire economy. Global borrowing now exceeds $315 trillion. Nearly 3 times larger than the entire world economy combined. And yet, the system continues operating every single day. Why? Because modern debt is no longer designed to disappear. It is designed to continue forever. Governments issue new debt to pay old debt. Banks buy government bonds. Central banks create new money to purchase those bonds again. And investors keep believing the system will survive long enough for the promises to remain valuable. The machine keeps moving, because confidence keeps moving with it. But behind governments sits another layer entirely: the markets. Huge financial institutions controlling trillions of dollars. pension funds, investment firms, central banks. These institutions quietly decide which countries can borrow cheaply and which countries begin collapsing under interest payments. When markets lose confidence in a country, currencies collapse, inflation surges, governments panic, entire economies begin breaking apart. That is why sovereign debt is not just economics, it is power. At the center of this system sits the modern central bank, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan. These institutions do not simply manage debt, they help create it. Every time central banks buy government bonds, new money enters the system. Debt becomes currency. And this reveals one of the strangest truths about modern finance. There is no such thing as debt-free money. Every dollar, every euro exists because debt exists somewhere else in the system. For decades, this machine survived because people trusted it. As long as investors believed governments would continue paying interest, the cycle kept functioning. But history shows what happens when confidence breaks. In Greece during 2010, debt spiraled beyond control. Investors panicked, interest rates exploded, and international institutions intervened. But the rescue came at a cost. Tax increases, spending cuts, mass unemployment. Argentina experienced repeated debt collapses. Sri Lanka suffered economic breakdown after running out of foreign reserves. And every time the system cracks, the creditors suddenly become visible. The IMF, bond markets, financial institutions capable of reshaping entire nations through lending power alone. But even after crises, the system always returns. New loans replace old ones. Debt gets refinanced, and the machine begins operating again. That's because modern sovereign debt was never designed to disappear completely. It was designed to continue forever. Governments today do not realistically plan to eliminate their debt. Instead, they roll it forward endlessly. Old bonds get replaced with new bonds. New borrowing pays for previous borrowing. And as long as investors continue believing the cycle remains stable, the system survives. Debt today functions almost like oxygen for global capitalism. Invisible, constant, and necessary for the financial system to keep breathing. And here lies the biggest paradox of all. If governments somehow paid off every debt completely, the financial system itself could begin collapsing, because government bonds are no longer viewed only as liabilities. They are also critical financial assets. Banks rely on them. Pension funds rely on them. Central banks rely on them. Global markets use them as trusted collateral. So when politicians promise to eliminate national debt entirely, they are often selling an illusion. The real goal is not repayment. The real goal is sustainability, keeping the system stable enough that confidence never fully disappears. Because once trust breaks, the entire structure begins shaking. But there is another layer hidden beneath all of this. Debt does not affect everyone equally. Interest payments flow upward through society, from taxpayers toward institutions and investors holding financial assets. Which means debt is not only a relationship between countries, it is also a relationship between classes. The people owning debt often benefit from the system. The people constantly servicing debt carry the burden. And over time, that imbalance quietly expands inequality itself, because modern economies increasingly reward ownership over labor, assets over wages, and eventually, everything returns to the same fragile foundation: belief. The modern world runs on confidence. Confidence in governments, confidence in currencies, confidence in institutions. Because if confidence ever truly breaks, the illusion disappears, and people suddenly remember what debt really is: a promise. one that cannot expand forever without consequences. That is why the question, who does the world owe money to, has no simple answer. The system loops back into itself. Governments owe banks. Banks owe investors. Investors depend on governments. And maybe that is the strangest financial truth of all. The global economy runs on belief. If you want to understand the hidden systems behind money, power, and civilization,
subscribe to Capital Secrets.